I have a question for you. Assuming that you have a job, or you have had a job, or it could also apply to a hobby or pastime, what level would you say you were? Are you a second level gardener? A fifth level care assistant? Perhaps you're an eighth level estate agent? Or you might even be a 15th level wargamer. Yes, today on Dragon's Teeth we ask, are levels necessary in RPGs? Hi, I'm Rob Poyton. Thanks for joining me today on Dragon's Teeth. So yes, levels in RPGs. I think if you spoke to a person on the street and said role-playing games, what are they all about? One of the things that would come up are wizards, fighters, dragons and levels. They are certainly a major part of RPGs, at least in the common view, I would say. Now, of course, we know there are games that don't have levels. So in a sense, the question is moot. Yes, you can play RPGs without levels, but I thought it might be interesting to look at the concept of levels, how and why they came about, and do we want to include them in our games? The question at the start then, what level are you in your occupation? That's not something that really arises, is it? I've never heard anyone say, I'm a fifth level at this or that. Of course, people can say, oh, I've got a degree in ancient history, I'm a head chef at a certain restaurant, I'm a grade 8 piano player, I'm a sergeant, I'm a chief superintendent. But these things are ranks and qualifications. In order to get ranks and qualifications, you have to study and take exams, or you get a promotion at work, presumably because you're good at your job. This idea that really came about through D&D, as we'll discuss in a moment, that you gather experience by accumulating money and killing things. Well, we'll leave the killing things aside, unless it's particularly dangerous in your office. That you don't get promotion by earning more money. In fact, it's the other way around. You get the promotion and then you earn more money. So it's not something that you can easily fit into everyday life. So I'm going to go back to the start of my own RPG in late 70s or really early 80s, I suppose. The games we played the most then were AD&D, Call of Cthulhu and Traveller. I'm not going to talk about Traveller because I can't really remember much about the mechanics, to be honest, but AD&D and Call of Cthulhu certainly do. And there we have this contrast between levels in AD&D and no levels in Call of Cthulhu. I think that levels came about in AD&D partly as a result of its genesis in tabletop wargaming, and in particular tabletop skirmish wargaming, where they wanted to represent individual figures or heroes from each side, and they were going to have a duel before the battle or during the battle, whatever it was. So I think it grew out of that wargaming mindset, and then the RPG elements gradually came in and gradually developed. In that case, you can see that the levels are important, because if you're playing a war game, generally your troops will be classified in some way. They might be elite troops, they might be run-of-the-mill, they might be inexperienced, which will all factor into how they perform on the battlefield, not only their fighting and defensive abilities, but also, of course, their morale. So in that sense, levels is kind of baked into wargaming. So that then bled over into RPGs, and I think the other issue here is, in terms of RPGs, people were looking at two things. One was campaign play. Your character develops. You start as a level 1 fighter perhaps, and 2 years later you're level 10, perhaps you've got a little castle somewhere and all the rest of it. So there's that aspect, that levelling up allows for some form of progression of your character. But the other side of that is something I found out quite recently, listening to Between Two Cans podcast. They were talking about the Against the Giants modules, the old Gary Gygax modules, which we played and then went all the way through that campaign into Vault of the Drow, and I remember thoroughly enjoying it. But one thing that came up in those was this talk about tournament modules. I don't know if this was a thing in the UK at the time. I certainly wasn't aware of it back then. But you go to a tournament and if, in effect you're playing a one shot, but because you're playing in a competitive setting, everyone has to have the same level characters. Everyone has to be the same capability before they do the module. I suppose this is like in sport, right? If West Ham were playing Man United and West Ham run out on the pitch and they've got 16 players, then someone's going to say something. No, that you've got to have the same amount of players. I do suspect it wouldn't do them much good, but that's another issue. So if we look at levels through that lens, campaign play, develop your character, or some sort of competition or tournament, again, you're pitching like against like, then levels make sense. Until we get to Call of Cthulhu, which has no levels at all. Here, characters have skills. They start with a certain amount of skills, depending on their occupation and their background. And they don't progress as characters in terms of, let's say you start as a level 1 professor. You don't gradually go up to being a level 10 professor. You can improve your skills, of course. The more you use your skills successfully, then you get a chance to roll the dice at the end of the session and improve them. Or you might take out of game time in order to go off and study something, learn a new language or whatever it is. But your hit points stay the same, your character essentially stays the same, they just get a bit better at what they do. Now, this might be because some people say, and I don't necessarily agree with it, that the Call of Cthulhu only really works with one-shots. Because I've run and played in a couple of Call of Cthulhu campaigns. I guess Masks of Nyarlathotep is the most obvious and one of the best, certainly. The issue with long-term play in Call of Cthulhu is your sanity, of course, because it has that lovely mechanic of the more you learn and the more you find out about the true nature of things, the more your sanity slowly crumbles away. Or it's like the grains in an hourglass. It just gradually runs out. So you might have the equivalent of that 10th level professor, say, but his sanity is down to 8. A loud bang is going to send him catatonic. It's effectively useless as a player character. However, for me, that kind of mechanic, the Call of Cthulhu or the Chaosium method, does make the game more realistic in many ways. Yes, you can improve your skills, but just because you're better at library research doesn't mean you get extra hit points. In fact, probably the reverse. The other aspect is, how do you get experience points? Well, let's be blunt. You get experience points by killing things and taking their stuff. So, if you're first level and you kill a zombie, you get, off the top of my head, probably totally inaccurate, you get 20 experience points. Once you've got X amount of experience points, you go up to level 2, your hit points increase, your chance to hit increases, and everything else. As a measurement of progress, it's one way of doing it. But looking back, particularly the way we used to play, everything becomes about killing stuff and nicking its gold. What was the phrase? Murder hobos, I think. And you do kill everything. I was reminded listening to that podcast about Against the Giants. You go into some of the giant castles or homesteads and there's adult giants, male and female giants and kids. And you just slaughter a lot generally because you want the experience points. And then you get into things like, I think it's in one of those games, is there like 20,000 gold pieces in a chest somewhere? So you get this aspect of the game where how physically do you transport that out of the dungeon or out of the scenario? Do you have a row of donkeys following you or helpers carrying sacks that you fill up? There's that aspect. But also tied in with that, this aspect of, great, if you're first level, you find 50 silver pieces in a pouch. That's good. I've got a nice boost on my experience points. If you're 10th level, 50 silver pieces are not going to touch the sides. That's not a scratch. So you have to be finding 20,000 gold pieces in order to make the adventure worthwhile, because everyone's focus is on leveling up. When I level up, I get better spells, I get better skills, and so on and so on. So let's jump forward to the current day and the 3 RPGs I'm involved in at the moment. I've been playing a Rolemaster campaign under Darren. I've been playing a Cult campaign run by Ove, that's just come to a close. And I'm in the middle of organising a Mothership campaign. And I guess when I was looking around at a system to run, I had certain specific things in mind. So I've been playing in 2, I'm going to be running 1. How do each of these approach the idea of levels? Rolemaster is old school. It's an old school set of rules. I think, did it come out 1982, maybe that kind of time? And if you want levels and tables and numbers, Rolemaster is your game. The campaign that Darren has been running at the moment has just sort of come to an end because it wasn't really working out. The nature of the campaign, it was quite a lot of intrigue involved, and we seemed to be wandering around a fair bit. It didn't suit the party or the players, so Darren took the bold step of saying, okay, we're going to finish that, we're going to start something new. And as it was, one of the players, Andy, came up with a great idea for a setting that Darren has called the Broken Empire. The Empire has just collapsed. You're a party of whatever your characters are going to be. How do you navigate this new world? So a great new setting, and I think Darren said he's going to make this campaign a little more granular. However, Rolemaster is all about, as I said, stats and levels and tables, and I enjoy playing it, but I don't think it's a game I could run, partly because I don't understand particularly the rules about levels. And I have read through the various rules. I have to say, I'm not sure if this is the original edition or I think there was a reprint sometime in the 90s, but they are quite obtuse, I find. They're not easy reading. The way everything is laid out, you have to flick backwards and forwards quite a lot. But it seems that at a level, you get to put points into certain ranks of skills. The ranks you have in skills then determines the number you have. You roll the dice and add that number to your dice roll. But this whole process, I can't get my head around for 2 reasons. One, the way it's written. And I did watch a guy on YouTube and he was saying, right, I'll take you through the levels. So if you've got 56 in this, that's your bonus. If you put that into 3 ranks, that will give you a plus 60. Unless you've got 2 in this rank, and in that case, you put 5 in there and you add 25 to that. And I'm kind of struggling already. And then he said about 6 minutes in, oh, hang on, I've made a mistake there. No, that's not right. And I thought, if the guy who's presenting it gets it wrong, what hope have I got? So we've just rolled up new characters. And Darren, bless him, has kindly agreed to do all my level and skill allocation points for me because I simply can't get my head around it. So that's Rolemaster, very much about levels, and really it's the D&D model, but writ large, way more involved than I remember D&D as being, way more detail to dig into. Cults, we've just finished the Black Madonna campaign and very enjoyable it was too. If enjoyable is the word, it's a very dark game. If you're into Clive Barker type horror, I highly recommend it. So it was a different approach from Call of Cthulhu, still a horror-based game. It was helped by the fact I think neither of us playing knew anything about the lore, so we really were discovering stuff as we went along. And I think even at the end of it, we still only have half an idea of what was going on. And in Cult, you create your character, but you've only got something like, I think, 6 statistics or whatever it is, and you can assign various things from that. There's a lot less dice rolling because let's say we get into a combat situation. Basically, you're going to roll a dice at the start against the relevant stat. You might have a skill that, a close quarter combat skill, that will give you a bonus. But that dice roll gives you a complete failure, a partial success, a complete success. And of course, you can get your critical fails and your critical successes as well. That then determines the course of the action, which is played out much more verbally and in description. I found that a very nice approach because it felt to me like I was more in control of what my character was doing. Of course, the luck of the dice does change things. You've got that element of risk and of chance, but I felt I could then base the actions of my character over that next 2 minutes or whatever it was on that dice roll, rather than, okay, you've got to roll the dice to draw your sword. Now you've got to roll the dice to see if you don't trip when you're running towards the orcs. Then so rather than rolling the dice for everything, it's much more a general feel. Now, when it comes to levels, there are sort of levels. At the end of every session, the game master allocates points according to what you've done, and you can put these into increasing your bonuses or into skills. Levels kind of comes in at the end of the whole thing. And again, we only just touched on this the other night, so do correct me if I'm wrong. But you can become more aware of the true nature of reality. Similar in Call of Cthulhu. And there are a few levels of this. I think the first one is it like enlightened or awoken or something like that. And that actually brings you some extra, well, generally quite sort of supernatural based skills. So it's not levels in the term of I'm a level 2 hitman, but your character does develop in quite strange and unusual ways. And this, for me, again, like Call of Cthulhu, felt more realistic. Maybe there's a difference in playing a fantasy setting and a modern setting. I don't know. Perhaps a modern setting we feel closer to that reality. I mean, in Cult, we're getting on a train to go to somewhere. We have to get into a hospital. There's a fight in the car park. I've had a couple of those in my time. So you can directly relate to it in that sense. Maybe with a fantasy setting, it's slightly more heroic in approach. I've not really played any grimdark type fantasy. Oh, I did take part in a Morkborg session once, and that was quite different. That was very splatter, I think we'll put it like that. I'm not sure if there's levels in that or not. I'd have to go and check. But that modern type of game, which Morkborg is, brings us nicely on to Mothership. So as you know, if you've been following the Mothership uploads I've been putting up lately, this was a game I read a lot about, sounded very interesting, got the chance to play a session at Concrete Cow in Milton Keynes, and I've been wanting to run an RPG for a while now, wanted to set up a campaign, and I thought, yes, this is the one. Now, I do have to qualify this to some extent, because in its, let's say, pure form, Mothership is really designed for one-shots. You're going to go aboard a deserted spaceship, you're going to get stressed very quickly, some horrible things are going to happen, someone's going to panic, you're going to be very, very lucky if everyone comes out alive. In fact, from what I've seen, generally speaking, most of the player characters don't survive. Great for a one-shot, but if you want to run a campaign, you want an element of longevity in the player characters. So I'm applying tweaks. The other great thing with Mothership is there's a huge community for it online. There's Discord, there's YouTube channels, and there's a host of scenarios. These one sheet, trifold scenarios, a sheet of A4, you get a whole scenario printed of those. Now, the wonderful thing is, rather than having to spend 50 quid on a campaign book, as I might have to with D&D or something, is I can go online and download these PDFs for a few quid. So I've got a whole range of scenarios lined up, not just from Mothership. I've been looking at cyberpunk games and some others to get different scenario ideas in. So very quick and very easy, and more importantly, very cheap to get the scenarios together. And one thing that Mothership doesn't have is levels. You start off as a marine or a tech or a scientist or whatever it is. Again, I'm going to be tweaking the character classes. You've got your skills and off you go. This is a little bit more like Traveller in a sense, where the character is pretty much fully developed by the time you start the game. You might have been a marine for 8 years or something. So you allocate all these skills at the various level according to your background and your experience. Once you're in the game itself, as far as I can see, that's it. That's pretty much it. You're not going to be increasing your hit points. You can, of course, increase your skills, but you need to study to do that. If we go back to that example, Call of Cthulhu, if I want to learn a new language, great, I'm going to spend 6 months doing X, Y, and Z to learn the language. I don't suddenly get it just because I've killed X amount of monsters and found some gold pieces. Do they have gold pieces in space? I guess you can if you want. You can have anything, right? Space pirates. There's a thought. So the question then arises, well, how does my character get any better? For this, I go to my day job, or one of my day jobs, of martial arts. Again, if you say to someone, the general public, I do martial arts, first thing they say is, oh, are you a black belt? That's the public conception of martial arts. The two martial arts that I've studied most in depth over the past 40 years or so, Chinese art and a Russian art, neither of which have any gradings in. The traditional Chinese martial arts didn't really have gradings. It more came in from the Japanese arts, the idea of white belt, black belt and all that sort of thing. So you take your grading to advance up to the next level. Chinese and Russian arts traditionally taught much less formally, and one thing I've had, sometimes new people will come into the group, perhaps from say a karate background, and they'd say everyone's training in together, beginners, advanced, whatever, no one's wearing belts, no one is graded. And they say, oh right, but how do you know you're getting any better? Well, the answer is you can do things easier. You can deal with an attack easier, you know how to restrain someone easier. Your skill develops. That skill isn't reflected in some sort of, for me, my opinion, artificial or arbitrary level. Let alone the less tangible things like, well, how stronger are you? How better is your movement? How is your breathing? Are you able to relax better under stress? You know, all these kind of benefits are quite difficult to grade. You're going to grade someone on their breathing. How long can you hold your breath? That kind of thing. So from that side of things, not having a level or a grade doesn't really faze me at all. A little bit similar in music, which was my other day job up until fairly recently. I took grade 2 piano, of course. People can get qualifications in music. I think you go up to grade 8 for piano or flute or singing or whatever it is. But I've done, I don't know, dozens of auditions for bands. Not once have I been asked what grade I am at piano or keyboards. You know, you get to an audition and they say, if it's a cover band, right, we're doing a Highway Star Made in Japan version, away we go. Or if it's an originals band, this is one of our songs. Or if you're writing stuff, oh, here's an idea for a riff I've got and we'll work on it. So I don't know of any musician, perhaps outside of the classical area, that will come and present themselves. I'm grade 6 on the guitar. And most people will go, all right, but can you play Sweet Home Alabama or whatever it is? So in that sense, not having levels or grades in my role playing doesn't faze me at all. And I guess then it's a question of taste. Are you someone who likes levels? You like to see your character progress up that ladder. There's these very measurable gaps between the rungs. Or is it just about the actual role playing? I'm definitely more in that latter category these days, having started out with the ADD hack and slash get my experience points. Now, to be honest, the other thing I like about Mothership is there's fewer stats. There's only a few stats. I'm happy to be guided by the dice to some extent, whether I'm the games master or whether I'm a player. You've got to have that element of chance and risk. And we all like throwing a dice, right, to see if we hit or miss. That's fine. But I think I prefer my characters to emerge using that as something of a guide, but then far more through their actions and reacting to the situations than these sort of arbitrary stepping stones to mastery. Those are my thoughts then, for what they're worth. I'd be very happy to hear your thoughts. Do you prefer a very structured RPG, or do you like things to be a little more loose? I'd also be interested in hearing what system you think deals best in levels. I've played a ton of other stuff. Flashing Blades I've been talking about lately. Star Trek, the role-playing game. 2000 AD Judge Dredd game we played as well. Yeah, memory's a little bit hazy on how they handled levels. I guess with Star Trek it was down to ranks from what I remember. Do let me know. Are levels important? Yes or no? And favourite systems or favourite mechanics for character development. As always, please do hit the subscribe button if you're enjoying the content on the channel here, as it really does help the channel grow. May the dice gods smile on you, and I'll see you soon.